The first question I want to ask you: politics,
Fashion.
Sexuality.
religion, films,
Nigeria.
sports, music. Because of my career. Just ask. Hi, everybody. Wow, time goes by very quickly, doesn't it? It's already time for the second season. I hope you enjoyed the first season. I got a lot of feedback from you. Thank you. For those who said they enjoyed it, thank you. For those who said they didn't enjoy it so much, thank you everybody for your honesty. I think honesty matters in everything. So second season, we're going to continue what you know. You will send me questions. I would answer them to the best of my abilities. I would also bring you guests whom I want to have conversations with. I think you might also want to hear talk. The thing with the kind of conversations we have is that they are conversations that treat people as fully functional human beings. What I mean is that there are no slogans, there are no labels. I just want to understand people's minds and idea, and I want to share those. And I think that's what you also would be interested in. So this is we're going to have all kinds of interesting guests. But first, the questions. What questions have you asked me? But some people said my laptop was a distraction. So well, I've brought my bag and my question is in my bag. So what question? Yes, this is the good old-fashioned way. Everybody says you should be tech. I like to do some things old-fashioned ways. I like to touch paper. I like to smell it. I even like to kiss it. So, question. Why is religion so destructive? What have I done to deserve this question as the first question of the season? Because it's a topic that it's a difficult topic because people are very, very sensitive and very emotional about their religious convictions for good reasons. Because a religion can be people's way of dealing with the trauma that life is. In some ways, life is kind of like a trauma, and that doesn't. I'm not saying that life is bad, life is horrible. I'm just saying that life is life, and can have moments of lows and even moments of euphoria that you need a higher understanding, or we need some sort of other understanding to cope with. Anyway, I'm not going to ramble too much. Let's talk about religion as best as we can. My personal opinion about religion is that religion is sort of like, I know somebody said it before and I like the way they said it, that religion is sort of like your private parts. It's yours, and it's a bit indecent to expose it in that way. And what I mean by that is, I'm not a believer in indecent exposure or anything like that. I think that the human body is a natural form of life, and we shouldn't be embarrassed about it. That said, because we are also rational human beings, we know that oftentimes we should dress it nicely. The same thing with religion. So our religion is us, is part of whom we are as individuals, but it's not something, I think, that should become the burden of other people. Religion is a very personal thing. I was raised Christian. Nigeria is interesting because, there are different forms of religion. So most of Nigeria is half Christian, half Muslim by the statistics, which I don't even think anybody has proper statistic. But I think this is more than Nigeria, because now it's an ideological thing around the world. Almost like the world has become ideologically polarized between the West and the so-called East and the different parts of the world. So there are the Judeo-Christian religions, the Islamic religion, and everything that comes with that, the different versions of it, whether it's Wahhabism, and then of course there are the Eastern religion like Buddhism, like Hinduism. I won't even call them Eastern or Western. These are just different bodies of thought, of ideas. Therefore, of course, the ones that people don't talk about often, and I like to talk about it because, well, I feel some sort of affinity for it, and that's more, traditional religious practices from different cultures of the world, and different cultures in Africa have different ones. I know that different cultures in other parts of the world have that. I'm fascinated by Celtic religion, for example, and I know that there's Yoruba religion, there's Igbo religion, there's all sorts of religious thoughts. I would like to start using the phrase religious thoughts, because I think that all religion in their basic self, in their purest form, and I don't know if anything can be pure in that way, but at their basic, at their foundation, is a body of philosophical thought to help guide life. And what I think becomes problematic often is that for every society or every culture, these philosophical thoughts get layered upon by cultural practices. And I will use the term literal cultural practices. And these literal cultural practices are the things that then define rather rigidly to people how they must live. And oftentimes, what is beautiful about foundation of religious thought or theology, whether it has Christian background or Judaism as background, or whether it has Buddhism or Hinduism, or whatever kind of religion, the basics of it are the philosophical ideas of life. And so those philosophical ideas usually they predict. I think there's a suggestion of people should know better. So it predicts what might work. And I'll give you an example. I think that Jesus Christ, for example, for the Christian faith, Jesus Christ was a radical. If he was alive today, half of the people who are Christians would probably be stoning him. Because all he was saying was, you cannot continue with the dogma, you cannot do this, this is what the culture is suggesting to you. However, as a rational human being or as a kind human being, what ought you be doing? So I can use the example of that because, well, I know Christianity. I also know Islam a bit because I was raised in a family that had both Christians and Muslims. And I've had interest in Judaism and all sorts. I would like to propose what I call, instead of religious morality, emotional morality. So a lot of religion is very much based on the material of what we are as human beings. So I'll give you an example, whether the body, because the body is material, you can see it, you can touch it. It's also based on what we own and what we are, the land, the place, the people. It's very material. So all of the cultural practices that are layered on religious philosophy is about morality around material. So whether it's the body of a person, usually female person, or the property of a person. So that's what becomes problematic, because I think that true religious thought and idea should be about emotional morality. And emotional morality I would define as what makes us human. And I'll give you an example of how this becomes stark. I think that one of the ways in which people use religion to do really destructive things, and we cannot argue that people have used religion through the centuries to do some of the most horrible, heinous, and harmful things to other human beings, is because they create the idea of an entity that is different from them as a human being. And as long as you give ultimate power to that entity, you can then say that that entity justifies what you do to the fellow human being. And I'll break it down. Let me give you this as an example. Some of the things that we've seen people do that you think, how could you possibly do this to another human being? If you were to sit with that person and say, the person will probably say to you, well, that's the will of God. I did what God was asking me to do. And if that person were to sit back and think, actually, if we removed that concept of God and we replace it as you yourself as a God, which means you do not have an excuse to say God said you should do this. You have done this. Most people who do those kind of things cannot confront themselves as having done the kind of things they do. And I'm talking across all religion. I'm trying to make this clear because it's clear in my head, but I'm translating it, I think. So if we didn't have the cop-out, and it's a cop-out, to outsource our responsibility as human beings to a higher unseen power, then we cannot justify doing anything to another human being on the basis of the authority of a higher authority. And that is the idea of this kind of God that most religions teach. Because I think that there's a different way to look at the concept of God and nature. And God is a word. The understanding of it is very personal and sometimes also very cultural. And in my own thinking and grappling with religious thought, and I will say to you that I thought that religion, when we understand it as philosophical basis of life, these are just basic suggestions of what will make life better for us. If we think about it that way, I think that religion can be very useful to people. It helps people find purpose. I don't think everybody needs that. I personally do not need religion, to have purpose. But people do need these things, and if they need it, they need it. And people have done great things also from the idea, the higher ideas around religion, the ideas of humanity, of building and supporting humanity. And I think that the most human thing we can do to one another and for one another is to prevent societies, systems and structures and people from making other human beings turn desperate. What I mean by that is that we should not have a structure or the environment that leads people to desperation, leads them to a point of survival, so they cannot be human. Am I making sense? I hope so. But what I'm trying to say is that part of our evolution as human beings should be a movement from religion to spirituality, from obvious demonstrative performance religion to personal religion or personal ways of dealing with other people. As I said, religion is a difficult topic. I can't speak for people generally. I can't prescribe for anybody what will work. What I have thought to be useful in having been raised in different religion and having lived in different countries and watching where we are going as human beings is that religious thoughts, which should guide religious thoughts, which should come from spiritual ideas, should be really more about suggestions of how to live better than actually, rigid rules and regulations about this is what you must do at this time. This is what you must do. When I look at some of the religious practices across religion, my mind gets mischievous, and I think, at the time when these things were prescribed and suggested in the cultures in which some of them come from, it may have been something really useful. It may even be something to help people be healthier, And I'll give you an example. I used to say this because when one of my granduncles taught me this. He was Muslim. He was one of the most, he was just one of the most gorgeous human beings I knew. And he used to say that having 4 wives, for example, he used to say, and about the Sharia in particular, he used to talk about the Sharia, that the Sharia actually presupposes that as a society, you must create utopia or something that is like utopia. That means you should have the social justice system that gives people equality. You must have healthcare system. You must have this, you must have that. It's encouraging people to strive to higher being or higher existence. So the laws itself do not supersede the ideas of creating societies that are more egalitarian, that are more equal, that are happier for human beings. And that I can connect with as a Yoruba person, because in Yoruba land, they will say to you that, they will only suggest an idea to you. You should be rational enough to know what the rest of it is. So it's sort of like oro or aboro, lan sọ fún ọmọlúàbí tó bá dénú ẹ̀ á di odidi. Literally, it means I only have to tell you half. I only need to tell you half of this conversation. By the time you internalize and digest it, you should be able to make it into the whole. And I think it's the same thing in my mind for Christianity. When Jesus will show by example, he was teaching parables and say, well, should you be doing this? Should you be doing that? It's not for us, how many thousands of years down the line, to now insist that, this is what he said, and that's what we must do in that way. Because culture evolves. The cultures we build around religious philosophy and ideas should also evolve. The languages evolve. Some of those things were written in languages that have gone, and if people are not open, if these things are not open to interpretation, they are not open to publicly to everybody, then anybody can interpret it within the prism of their own understanding. And sometimes even the people who interpret it, they don't mean harm. They just don't have a full picture. I give you an example. In translating the Bible from English to Yoruba, that was done by the Venerable Bishop Ajayi Crowther for Nigeria. He translated Eshu into the devil. It's a very unfortunate translation, because the concepts are completely different. The concept of issue and the concept of devil, because the concept of issue is much more all-encompassing, almost like, when you're thinking about the two extremes of ourselves as human beings, you can either be your light and your dark, and the continuous juggle of the two. Meanwhile, the concept of the devil is rather, finite, because it prescribes that the devil is just the bad. So this happens across board with all religion. And I think we shouldn't get bogged down and just get bogged down in the practices around religion, but maybe in the thoughts, some of the thoughts which are really, they're very similar to any body of philosophical thoughts. If you read all the great thinkers, all the great philosophers, a lot of what they say is similar to what you find in most religion once you kind of like unpack the cultural bits, the conditioning bits, the frozen in time ideas. If we do that, I think it will be more beneficial to us as human beings. I think that we should be talking about ourselves not as material being only, but as, powerful beings, spiritual beings, emotional beings. And I think that the most important form of morality is morality around humanity, around our emotions, around our being, not around our material. So it cannot be important, therefore, how a person presents themselves to you, because that's that person's choice. What matters is who's that person, what are they thinking, what do they want to do. So therefore we get away from things like religious tolerance, because it's a very problematic term. When you say tolerance, it means that in the first instance that thing is a bit of a disturbance, so you're just learning to tolerate it. It shouldn't be tolerance. It should be that people who have religion, and this also includes people who don't have religion. People don't have to have religion. People don't have to believe in God. Of course, there's the argument that some people who don't believe in God, atheists, have become so radical and so organized about it, they themselves have become a religion. So there's a lot of balkanization of ideas, whether it's religion or any form. And I think personally for me, that it's important for us as human beings to actually start charting where we are going forward, what we're going to do. And all of these things, these divisions, are a distraction and they are a reduction of our potentials as human beings. So the only kind of religion I personally am interested in is really one that is philosophical prescription of how human beings can have emotional morality towards one another and personal responsibility for their own action. That's all. Gosh, I have a headache. I have a headache. There's a bit of me that wants to say, I wish there was no religion. But I know that you don't do that, because nothing is a problem of its own. It's how we interpret it and how we use it as human beings. I just wish people would be kinder to one another and people would know as a rule, because even the lowest animals, so-called lowest animals, know this. They don't kill each other, they don't harm each other unless it is for survival. You will never hear any animal says that I dislike who you are, I dislike what you are, because God said so. If animals know better, why don't we know better? Anyway, that's where I'm going to end it. That's the first edition of the show. I hope I'm not getting myself into trouble. Anyway, I've said my piece. Next week, send me more questions and I'll say my piece. And you can say your piece by sending me comments about what I've said so that we can grow together. I said it at the beginning, I'm nobody's auntie. I'm not anybody's role model. I'm just a person wanting to get better, sharing opinions with you. All right. See you next week. Bye. So hard.